Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling just a truly chilling and incredibly complex chapter in modern Australian history. We're going to be talking about the crimes of Ivan Milat, who is, of course, known as the backpacker murderer.
And our mission with this deep dive is, I think, a crucial one. We really have to move beyond just the headlines, the basic facts that you might already know.
Right.
We want to get into the analytical core of the source material. The goal here is to give you a really comprehensive understanding of Milat himself, his history of violence, which started very young, the methodical modus operandi of his attacks, and some of the systemic factors that shaped this case.
Yeah, both in the investigation and, frankly, in the legal failures that came before.
Exactly.
For this, we're drawing on a huge range of sources: historical accounts, investigative reports, biographical details that cover not just the 7 murders he was convicted of, but also the really unsettling number of suspected additional crimes.
And before we go any further, I think it's important we acknowledge the profoundly tragic nature of what we're about to discuss. We're handling this story with the utmost respect for the victims.
Absolutely.
These were 2 men and 5 women whose lives were just brutally stolen, and for their families who have had to endure decades of pain.
So to set the scope for you, the core facts are these. Between 1989 and 1992, in New South Wales, Ivan Milat abducted, assaulted, robbed, and murdered 7 people.
And his strategy was based on deception. He'd offer a ride to hitchhikers, mostly travelers, along the very busy Hume Highway. But then he would divert them into the Belanglo State Forest, an isolated, desolate place that became his personal killing ground.
Okay, so let's try to unpack how this all began by looking at Milat's background. He was born Ivan Robert Marko Milat in 1944. He was the 5th of 14 children.
14. The father, Stephen, was a Croatian immigrant, and his mother, Margaret, was Australian. And you have to understand, this family environment was shaped by really significant poverty.
Initially, they were on a rural farm outside Sydney.
Right.
So a lot of isolation.
A lot of isolation and a setting that it instilled a certain toughness, but also a real familiarity with weapons. The family later moved to a suburb of Sydney, to Liverpool.
And while some sources say the parents were conscientious, tried to get their kids, 10 of whom were boys, in education, the home itself was incredibly volatile.
It was. The father, Stephen, was known to have a really severe temper, and it was made much worse by alcoholism.
And this is maybe the most chilling part, that predictive element. Many of the 10 Milat boys were already on the radar of local police. Petty crimes, some minor violence.
Right, and they were all accustomed to handling knives, handling firearms. They practiced shooting in their own yard. It was just part of the fabric of their lives.
So this culture of weapons and aggression was completely normalized for them.
For Ivan Milat specifically, this dangerous antisocial behavior started remarkably early. He showed signs that analysts would later look back on and identify as, severe psychopathy.
At what age are we talking?
Age 13. His violent tendencies were already so pronounced, specifically attacking animals, sometimes with machetes, that he was sent away to a residential school. It was an attempt to curb this behavior.
And it seems like that intervention did very little to change his path. His early life just became a cycle of escalating crime.
It did. By 17, he's already in juvenile detention for theft. At 19, he's involved in a shop break-in, and this pattern of being in and out of prison just continued relentlessly through the mid-1960s.
Can you just run us through that early record?
Sure. In 1964, he gets 18 months for breaking and entering. Within a month of getting out, he's arrested again, this time for driving a stolen car. That gets him 2 years of hard labor.
And then again?
And then again. By 1967, he's only 22, and he's back inside for another 3 years for theft. So he's establishing this critical pattern of recidivism. He just cannot function in normal society.
This is where the analysis gets particularly chilling, I think, because we have to look at the attack in April 1971. This incident, it's not just another crime. It's almost a perfect dress rehearsal for what he would do 20 years later.
It's the exact blueprint. He's 27 years old in April 1971. He uses the exact same methodology. He abducts 2 18-year-old female hitchhikers near Liverpool railway station, threatens them with a knife. He then rapes one of the victims.
But the victims, with just incredible presence of mind, they managed to get away.
They did. Milat stopped at a petrol station cafe, and they saw their chance, and they fled. He was arrested that same day. He was charged with 1 count of rape and 2 counts of armed robbery. And really, that should have been it. That should have been the end of his violence.
But it wasn't. The legal system, tragically, failed at this critical moment. While he's awaiting trial, Milat does something bizarre and incredibly manipulative.
He fakes his own suicide. He leaves his shoes strategically placed at the gap.
And for anyone who doesn't know, the Gap is a notorious suicide spot in Sydney. It's known for its high cliffs, so the location choice is highly significant.
Oh, it's not just an attempt to escape. It's a calculated theatrical effort to convince everyone he's dead. He's leveraging the tragedy of that location to buy himself time and, stop the search.
It's manipulative genius in a dark way.
It worked. He successfully fled, lived on the run for 2 years, Queensland, Victoria, even New Zealand. He reportedly would sneak back into Sydney sometimes using a fake passport.
So how was he eventually caught?
He was only rearrested in 1974. He came back because his mother had a heart attack.
So even with the victims identifying him, the evidence of the abduction, the charges just failed at trial in 1974. We have to pause on this. Why did the prosecution collapse?
Well, there were a few factors at play, and they really reflect the deficiencies of legal and forensic systems of the early 70s. For one, Milat had the full aggressive backing of his huge family.
And they hired a pretty notorious lawyer, didn't they?
They hired John Marsden, a highly influential Sydney lawyer known for his tenacious, sometimes ruthless defense tactics.
And what was Marsden's strategy?
He successfully used the long 2-year delay between the crime and the trial, a delay caused by Milat himself, of course, to basically erode the credibility of the victim's testimony. He argued against the reliability of their identification after so much time had passed.
So that delay, which Milat engineered, combined with an aggressive lawyer who knew how to exploit the system's weaknesses. That was the difference between him going to prison and him walking free.
It was, and that was a tragic turning point that would end up costing so many lives.
After his acquittal, Milat gets what becomes a really important professional cover. Around 1975, he starts working on and off for the Roads and Traffic Authority, the RTA, for the next 20 years.
And this wasn't just a job for him, it was the perfect vehicle for his future crimes.
Let's really elaborate on that.
Yeah.
Why was the RTA job so crucial to him?
It gave him two things: mobility and plausible deniability. The RTA had him working on remote sections of highways. That meant extensive travel and a deep, intimate knowledge of isolated bushland areas, especially along the major transit corridors out of Sydney.
And it would also give him a reason to have certain items in his vehicle.
Exactly. It gave him access to heavy-duty vehicles and a legitimate reason to be carrying tools, ropes, maybe even weapons that wouldn't raise immediate suspicion. This geographic freedom was the crucial prerequisite for the scale of the backpacker murders.
And even during his time with the RTA, the pattern of violence continued. That acquittal clearly didn't deter him at all.
Not in the slightest. There's the uncharged 1977 attempted rape and murder of 2 women who were hitchhiking from Liverpool to Canberra.
And that 1977 incident, even though it didn't lead to charges, it just reinforced the emerging MO.
It's the same pattern, targeting female hitchhikers on major highways leading out of Sydney. It confirmed this consistent, escalating predatory behavior that spanned the entire 1970s and 80s, long before anyone had ever heard of Belanglo State Forest.
So now we have to turn to that period, the horrific period that defined his identity. The Belanglo State Forest murders from 1989 to 1992. And the victims, they were young, often international backpackers, all relying on hitchhiking to see the country.
The location itself is so important to visualize. Belanglo is this dense, rugged pine forest about 15 kilometers southwest of Berrima in the Southern Highlands.
It's remote.
Very remote. It's easy to get lost in, and critically, it's accessible right off the Hume Highway, which is the main road connecting Sydney and Melbourne. For a killer, it was both a hunting ground and a perfect, isolated disposal site.
Let's detail the timeline of the disappearances. It starts in 1989.
That year, we lose 2 Australians, Deborah Everest and James Gibson. Both were 19. They went missing on December 30th. They'd left Sydney and were planning to hitchhike south to a festival near Albury. They just vanished.
And then, in 1991, the pattern seems to go international.
It does. A German national, Simone Schmidl, who was 20, disappeared on January 20th. She was hitchhiking from Sydney to Melbourne. Later that year, on Boxing Day, December 26th, a German couple, Gabor Neugebauer, 21, and Anja Habschied, 20, they disappeared after leaving their hostel in King's Cross. Their goal was to hitchhike to Adelaide and then Darwin.
So the last known victims disappeared in 1992.
Yes, 2 British backpackers, Caroline Clark, 21, and Joanne Walters, 22. They were last seen on April 18th in King's Cross, heading for the Hume Highway. So you have 7 victims spanning 3 years, multiple nationalities, all linked by that same vulnerability, trusting a stranger for a ride.
The investigation really only began when the bodies started being found, and the discovery timeline is just as crucial here. The first discovery was pure chance, September 19th, 1992.
2 orienteering runners were in Belanglo State Forest, and they found a concealed corpse. When police returned the next morning, they found a second body just 30 meters away.
And these were identified as the British backpackers.
Caroline Clark and Joanne Walters, yes.
The examination of their remains, it instantly signaled just a high level of calculated brutality. Let's look at the injuries that Joanne Walters sustained.
Walters had been stabbed 15 times, 4 times in the chest, once in the neck. But the critical discovery, the thing that pointed to a specific kind of killer, was 9 stab wounds concentrated in her back.
And these were designed to do something specific.
They were designed to sever the spinal cord. This would have caused immediate and total paralysis. This wasn't overkill in a frenzy. This was calculated incapacitation.
And Caroline Clark's fate was just as horrific, but the method was different.
She was shot 10 times in the head at the burial site. The positioning of the wounds led investigators to believe, chillingly, that she had been used as target practice.
This suggests such a level of sadistic detachment, a desire to prolong suffering or just establish total dominance.
Absolutely. Now, after that initial discovery, police searched the area, but this was a mistake. They ruled out finding more bodies. They thought it might be a single, one-off, double murder.
But the killer was still out there, and his other victims were still missing. It was over a year before the next discovery.
That happened on October 5th, 1993. A local man was out looking for firewood in a more remote part of the forest, and he stumbled on human bones. This led to the remains of James Gibson and Deborah Everest.
And the brutality here was escalating. The injuries this Australian couple sustained were particularly savage.
Gibson's skeleton was found in a fetal position. He had 8 stab wounds. A large knife had been used to cut through his upper spine again, causing paralysis. He had wounds to his back and chest that would have punctured his heart and lungs.
And Deborah Everest?
She had been brutally beaten. Her skull was fractured in 2 places. Her jaw was broken. There were knife marks literally etched onto her forehead and a severe stab wound in her back.
This particular case had a really confounding detail. James Gibson's camera and his backpack had been found months before, but over 120 kilometers north of Belanglo, in a place called Galston Gorge.
Right, which was close to where Mila actually lived.
So what did that suggest to investigators?
It strongly suggested the killer was deliberately trying to mislead them, to expand the geographical scope of the case. It was a calculated attempt to dispose of non-essential items far from the burial site, maybe to throw off profiling or just create confusion.
And the discoveries just kept coming. In November 1993, the monstrous scale of this spree was becoming clear.
On November 1st, a police sweep finally located Simone Schmidl's skeleton. She had at least 8 stab wounds. 2 of them had severed her spinal column, that same calculated paralysis technique we saw with Walters and Gibson.
And just days later, the last 2 victims were found.
Anja Hapschid and Gabor Nugebauer, found nearby in shallow graves about 50 meters apart. And the scene here revealed the most extreme violence yet.
How so?
Gabor Nugebauer had been bound, which suggests he was restrained before the attack and then shot 6 times in the head. But the most horrifying detail involved Anja Hapschid. She had been decapitated.
And her skull was never found.
Never. Despite extensive, prolonged searches of the entire area. This implies the killer took it, removed it, or disposed of it somewhere else, adding another layer of sadistic control and, taking a trophy.
So if we synthesize the modus operandi here across these 7 victims, clearly this wasn't random, what are the key insights into his psychology?
Well, you see 3 consistent interlocking elements. First, that systematic method of incapacitation before the final kill, the stab wounds to the spine to induce paralysis. The intent here is pure dominance, to render the victim utterly helpless but fully conscious.
And then second, the sheer escalation of brutality and the variation in the methods.
Right, the variation, stabbing, shooting, what looks like target practice, decapitation. It suggests a desire for psychological experimentation, or maybe an escalating need for satisfaction in the act of control. The torture, the broken bones, the knife marks on the forehead, it all points to a deep sadistic component. The pain and terror of the victim were central to the experience for him.
And finally, there was the crucial forensic link. The consistent use of a small caliber weapon.
Yes. The ballistics evidence pointed consistently to a .22 caliber rifle. It's a common hunting and target shooting rifle, which would have been easily masked within the Milat family's obsession with guns.
So that consistency, the weapon, and the MO of incapacitation, that's what allowed investigators to eventually conclude it was a single perpetrator.
It was, despite the initial confusion over the varying death methods and the fact that most victims were in pairs.
I want to press on that initial confusion because you have a decapitation versus these paralysis stabs. It seems natural to think multiple killers might be at work. Why were they able to dismiss that theory?
That's a critical question. And yes, the initial speculation was that, especially with pairs of victims, which often suggests two attackers, but the advanced link analysis that Task Force Air used, it revealed that the signature of the crime was invariant.
The signature being the incapacitation.
The deliberate incapacitation and the location. If one person uses a specific, very unusual technique like spinal paralysis on 3 separate pairs of victims over 3 years and uses the same caliber of weapon, the consistency of that signature overrides the superficial differences in execution. They concluded one mind was dictating the methodology, even if the tools varied.
The sheer volume of death, this escalating brutality, it spurred a massive police response. Task Force Air was officially established in October 1993.
Right. It was composed of more than 20 experienced detectives, analysts, support staff, a huge operation for the New South Wales Police.
And the pressure was just immense. The fact that an unknown killer was preying on international travelers created a diplomatic issue and just severe panic.
Of course, and the government amplified that urgency. The reward for information was increased to a staggering $500,000 in November 1993.
So Task Force Air had this enormous challenge. Hundreds of suspects, hundreds of tips. How did they get from a vague list of 230 suspects down to a manageable few?
They used sophisticated link analysis technology. This meant cataloging every single detail: vehicle descriptions, witness sightings, known movements of persons of interest, weapon types, and that unique MO and cross-referencing everything.
Yeah, that systematic approach worked.
It allowed them to filter that massive list down to a much shorter, highly focused list of just 32 individuals. And that process eventually led them to zero in on the Milat family.
And this is where the investigation finds its crucial turning point. A breakthrough that came from the survival of one man, Paul Onions.
Yes. A 24-year-old British backpacker. He contacted police from the UK on November 13, 1993. His account, from all the way back in 1990, was the linchpin that tied Ivan Milat directly to that hunting ground.
Onions' incident is just an exact blueprint of Milat's predatory behavior, but this time the victim got away.
Exactly. On January 25, 1990, Onions was hitchhiking south from Liverpool Station. He accepts a ride from a man who introduces himself as Bill near Casula, which is less than a kilometer from Milat's base of operations on the Hume Highway.
Can you recount the confrontation? It's terrifying.
As they drove south, near Mittagong, which is very close to the Belanglo turnoffs, the man, Bill, suddenly pulls out a revolver and some rope.
A revolver in the car.
Right. And he announces he's going to rob Onions.
The resourcefulness and the sheer luck of Paul Onions in that moment is incredible.
It really was. He managed to get out of the vehicle and just run. As he ran, Bill fired at him multiple times. Onions ran onto the highway and flagged down a passing motorist, a woman named Joanne Barry.
And together they went to the police.
They drove straight to the Barrel police station and filed a detailed report, a description of the assailant and his specific vehicle.
And this report, filed years earlier, this was the gold standard for the investigation.
It was. Task Force Air detectives rediscovered that statement in April 1994. And the meticulous detail, the description of Bill, the silver Nissan Patrol four-wheel drive, the location, it was all corroborated, not just by Joanne Barry, but also by an acquaintance of Milat who recognized the description as Ivan Milat.
So after that identification, police surveillance on Milat's house began.
It did, in February 1994, so several months before the arrest. And that surveillance, plus the parallel investigation, it revealed some critical forensic and circumstantial evidence.
What were the key pieces of intelligence they gathered during that time?
First, they discovered Milat had sold his silver Nissan Patrol shortly after the bodies of Clark and Walters were found. A highly suspicious, deliberate attempt to get rid of the murder vehicle.
And what else?
Second, the police did a meticulous analysis of his work records from the RTA, and they confirmed that Ivan Milat had not been working on any of the specific days that the known attacks occurred.
So he was clearing his schedule. These were premeditated, not crimes of opportunity.
Precisely. And then there was his private life. Acquaintances all corroborated his extreme, intense obsession with weapons. It was a known family trait, but it was particularly pronounced in Ivan.
With that circumstantial evidence mounting, Paul Onions was flown back to Australia. And on May 5th, 1994, he positively identified Milat in a lineup. That was the final piece.
It was. The arrest was dramatic. May 22, 1994, 50 police officers surrounded Milat's house in Eaglevale. He was arrested immediately on the robbery and weapons charges from the Onions attack, which prevented him from getting inside and destroying any evidence.
And the subsequent search of his home and the properties of his extended family, it just confirmed everything.
The evidence was overwhelming. At his home, police found a cache of weapons, a .22 caliber Anschutz rifle, and critically, parts of a .22 caliber Ruger 1.22 semi-automatic rifle.
And that model was identified as being consistent with the murder weapon.
Through ballistics, yes. The unique striations on the bullets recovered from the victims matched. They also found a Browning pistol and a large Bowie knife.
The fact that they found parts of the Ruger is significant. It suggests he tried to destroy it.
It does. It implies he tried to dismantle the murder weapon to make it useless as evidence, but he failed to get rid of all the key components. The forensic work to match those fragments to the bullets was a real triumph of investigative science.
But the most damning evidence, the thing that tied him directly to the victims, was recovering their personal belongings.
Absolutely. Items belonging to several of the murdered backpackers, a camera, clothing, sleeping bags, camping equipment, they were all found in Milat's home.
And not just his home.
Right. And this is significant. Even more of the victim's possessions were found in the homes of his mother and 5 of his brothers.
Which suggests what?
It suggests Milat didn't just commit the crimes in a vacuum. He may have relied on his family, either for deliberate collaboration in hiding things, or at the very least an awareness of the crimes and a willingness to harbor stolen goods. It raised these really uncomfortable, enduring questions about just how much the Milat clan really knew.
So Milat was officially charged with all 7 of the backpacker murders on May 31st, 1994. And despite the mountain of evidence against him, he remained just astonishingly confident he could beat the charges.
That confidence, it came from this deeply narcissistic belief in his own superiority and a really cynical understanding of legal loopholes. After he was charged, he sacked his high-profile family lawyer, John Marsden.
Right, the one who got him acquitted in '74.
The very same one. He sacked him and chose to seek legal aid instead, believing he could outsmart the system himself.
The trial began in March 1996. It was prosecuted by Mark Tedeschi in the Supreme Court of New South Wales, and it quickly became a media spectacle.
Milat's defense strategy was simple if audacious. He argued all the evidence was purely circumstantial, and he tried to deflect the blame onto other members of his large, often criminal family, especially his brother Richard.
And they also argued it was impossible for him to have done it all alone.
Right. They pointed to the physical effort required to bury the bodies. But Milat's own bizarre comments revealed his mindset. In phone recordings made after the trial, he stated his defense position very clearly.
What did he say?
He said it wasn't his job to prove his innocence. It was up to the state to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. He honestly believed the circumstantial nature of the evidence would get him off, just like it did in 1974.
But he really underestimated the thoroughness of task force error this time.
And the power of the cumulative evidence. Despite his defense team's best efforts to introduce doubt, suggesting the knife wasn't the murder weapon or that the victim's possessions were planted, the sheer convergence of everything was just insurmountable.
The victim's property, the weapon fragments, and the positive ID from Paul Onions.
Exactly. It was just too much.
After 18 weeks of harrowing testimony, the jury found him guilty.
On all 7 counts of murder, July 27, 1996. He was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences without any possibility of parole, plus another 3 6-year terms for the crimes against Paul Onions.
His time in prison started immediately, and it was marked by extreme violence and perpetual protest. On his very first day at Maitland Jail, he was beaten severely by another inmate.
It was a preview of what was to come for him in maximum security, and he immediately started trying to manipulate the system from behind bars. In May 1997, he attempted a violent escape with another inmate, a man named George Savas.
That escape attempt failed, and the aftermath was dark.
Very dark. Savas was found hanged in his cell the next day. Whether it was suicide or something more sinister, it's still debated. But the incident secured Milat's reputation as a high-risk inmate, and he was transferred to the extreme security of Goulburn Correctional Center, or Supermax.
And in Supermax, Milat became notorious for these dramatic, highly visible incidents of self-harm. He used them as desperate attempts to force attention onto his case.
His manipulation was so calculated. In 2001, for instance, he swallows razor blades, staples, other metal objects. It forces medical intervention. It gets him media attention. Then in 2009, we see perhaps the most gruesome attempt.
He cut off his own little finger.
With a plastic knife. And his intention, unbelievably, was to mail the severed finger to the High Court of Australia to compel them to hear an appeal. Doctors couldn't reattach it.
That visceral act just shows the extreme lengths he would go to maintain some kind of control.
And this manipulation wasn't always directed at high judicial matters. In May 2011, in an almost comical contrast, he went on a 9-day hunger strike. He lost 25 kilograms.
And what was he trying to get?
A PlayStation 3 for his cell.
He was unsuccessful.
He was. And that blend of horrific violence, calculated manipulation, and almost juvenile entitlement, that's what defined his decades in prison.
Milat's final days began in May of 2019. He was diagnosed with terminal esophageal cancer.
He was transferred to Long Bay Correctional Center for Palliative Care, and he died there on October 27, 2019. He was 74.
And what really defines his death is the complete lack of closure he provided.
Absolutely. New South Wales police officers visited him 8 times in his final months. They tried everything, different teams of detectives, psychological approaches. They even played recorded interviews with the victims' families to try and get a confession.
Or at least to find out where Anja Habshid's missing skull was.
Right. But he steadfastly refused. He maintained his innocence right up until the end, adding one final act of cruelty to the families who just desperately wanted some resolution.
There was one report, though, that he did admit it to one person.
Only one. It was reported that he admitted responsibility for the murders only to his mother, who he had a very close dependent bond with, but that was years earlier before she died. It was a confession for his own psychological relief, not for public justice.
Even in death, his arrogance was just on full display. He wrote a letter asking for the New South Wales government to pay for his funeral.
A demand for the state to pay for him one last time. The request was rightly refused. His body was cremated and the costs were taken from the funds in his own prison account.
That refusal to confess, especially in the face of death, it just raises this profound, unsettling question that has haunted this investigation from the very start. How many other victims are out there?
We have to move into that shadow now, the shadow of other potential victims and the dark echoes within his own family.
Because Task Force AIR always maintained that he committed far more than 7 murders.
Always. The head of the task force, Clive Small, was adamant. Milat's job with the RTA gave him immense geographical mobility. He could work and travel across vast distances, not just New South Wales, but Queensland, Victoria, South Australia, even Western Australia.
And the initial police investigation into cold cases that matched his profile and MO, it ran to 58 individuals.
58. People from the US, the UK, Germany, Italy, New Zealand, all linked by similar circumstances. Hitchhiking, disappearing near a major highway, bodies found in isolated bushland. His RTA job was the perfect cover.
Commander Small identified at least 3 unsolved murders with a high possibility of being Milat's victims, based on an almost identical MO.
And Milat's confirmed travel movements at the time. These are the cases that demand deeper scrutiny.
Let's start with the earliest. It goes all the way back to 1971, right around the time he was acquitted for that first rape and abduction case, the case of Karen Rowland.
Karen Rowland was 20 and pregnant. She vanished on February 26, 1971, in Canberra. Her car was found abandoned that evening. Her bones were discovered 3 months later in the Fairburn pine plantation.
And the connection to Milat is substantial.
It is. He was 26 and working for the Department of Main Roads, the precursor to the RTA. He drove frequently between Liverpool and Canberra for his job.
And there was a damning anecdote.
On the day after Rowland vanished, Milat allegedly boasted to his coworkers in Liverpool that he'd murdered someone and buried the body in the bush. He also reportedly drove a gold-colored Ford Fairmont, similar to a car seen chasing a woman matching Rowland's description. The MO, the timing, the location, it makes it a very strong candidate.
Okay, the second high possibility case jumps forward to 1987, 2 years before the Belanglo spree officially began. This is Peter Letcher, 18 years old.
Letcher was hitchhiking to his parents' home in Bathurst. He never arrived. His remains were found months later, in January 1988, near the Jenolan Caves, again an isolated, forested tourist area.
And his death exhibits Milat's signature in extreme detail.
It's a mirror image. Letcher was found handcuffed. He was shot 5 times in the head with a .22 caliber gun matching the Belanglo weapon type and stabbed repeatedly in the back. There were also signs of possible sexual assault.
And there's a personal connection here, linking Milat's own life turmoil to the timing.
There is. This murder happened shortly after Milat's wife, Karen, left him because of his domestic violence. She later confirmed that Ivan had taken her to that general area, the Belanglo State Forest, shortly before Letcher disappeared. It suggests a rage murder using the exact same MO he would perfect later in a place he knew well.
The third case occurred right in the middle of his known killing spree. Diane Pinocchio, 29, disappeared on September 6, 1991.
She was hitchhiking from Bungendore. Her body was found in the Talaganda State Forest 2 months later.
And this case is arguably the strongest forensic link outside the 7 convictions.
Because the MO is an exact match for the calculated cruelty we see at Belanglo. Pinocchio was found wrapped in pine branches, her clothes arranged in a way that suggested sexual assault.
And what specifically links her death to that unique signature?
The cause of death. A stab wound to the 7th thoracic vertebra designed specifically to cause paralysis. This is Milat's rare signature move. This murder happened between the killing of Simone Schmidl and the later murders of Neugebauer and Habscheid. It shows he was operating with consistency, using the same psychological technique, even outside of Belanglo.
Beyond these 3, Task Force Air also investigated a cluster of unsolved disappearances in the Hunter region of northern NSW between 1978 and 1980.
Right, focusing on 6 young women, Leanne Goodall, Robin Hickey, Amanda Robinson, Amanda Zolis, Annette Briffa, and Susan Eisenhood. The geographical and temporal links to Milat are undeniable.
He was a road worker in that area for the RTA.
Throughout the late 70s and early 80s, he was known to frequent local hotspots, including the Star Hotel, which is where one of the victims, Leanne Goodall, was last seen.
And let's focus on Susan Eisenhood. She vanished in 1980.
Her skeletal remains were eventually found in 1986 in the Coarac State Forest. Investigators managed to get Milat's RTA accommodation records. They placed him in Taree, repairing the Pacific Highway at the exact time of her disappearance. It confirmed his presence where a victim's body was dumped.
And there was an inquest in 2001 into some of these disappearances.
Yes, into Goodall, Hickey, and Robinson. And it specifically noted Milat's definite links to the Hunter region. When he was questioned about it, he maintained this chilling arrogance. He claimed he'd picked up maybe 15 hitchhikers, but never in that region. He even made a callous comment, questioning why a 14-year-old Amanda Robinson was roaming at midnight.
But there wasn't enough for charges.
Strong circumstantial links, but not enough proof.
His MO seems to link him to cases all up and down the eastern seaboard.
In Queensland, you have the 1972 case of Anita Cunningham and Robin Hoinville-Bartram. Hoinville-Bartram's body was found shot in the head with the exact type of .22 caliber rifle Milat favored.
And a year later, in 1973, Gabrielle Jenke and Michelle Riley
vanished hitchhiking from Brisbane to the Gold Coast. Riley's body was found in isolated bushland. Her clothing was disturbed, and branches had been intentionally placed over her body. This covering of the remains with bush debris. It's a strong echo of how he concealed his victims in Belanglo.
The pattern even extends back into Sydney. 1978, Stephen Lapthorne and Michelle Pope disappear.
A 2005 inquest concluded their deaths were homicides, and the coroner in that inquest identified Ivan Milat as the individual most likely to have killed the couple.
And Milat's dark legacy, it tragically extends into his own bloodline. We know his marriage to Karen Duck ended in 1989, right as the murders began, because of his domestic violence. She called him gun crazy.
And that violence echoed into the next generation. In 2010, years after Ivan's conviction, his great-nephew, Matthew Milat, committed a murder on his 17th birthday.
In the same location.
In the Belanglo State Forest. He murdered David Ochterlony with a double-headed axe, a terrifying crime that was audio recorded. It just cemented the forest's dark association with the Milat name. Matthew Milat got 43 years in prison.
Finally, we have to revisit the earliest possible sign of his characteristic cruelty. The 1962 shooting of a taxi driver, Neville Knight.
Milat was only 17. It was a robbery attempt. He was never caught.
And Knight was left paralyzed from the waist down.
Milat's brother, Boris, later told authorities that Ivan confessed this crime to him years later. And authorities noted the crucial, devastating MO similarity, the deliberate incapacitation or paralysis of the victim. This suggests his use of paralysis as a method of control goes back 2 decades before Belanglo.
Clive Small, who led Task Force Air, explicitly stated he believed Milat was responsible.
He did.
So if we look back at the breadth of all this material, the 7 known murders, the methodical operation, the calculated cruelty, and this terrifying number of unsolved cases across Australia that share his brutal signature, the sheer scale of his criminal life is just staggering.
And his crimes, they permeated popular culture. The Wolf Creek films, numerous books and documentaries. It speaks to the deep trauma he inflicted on the Australian psyche, the fear he instilled in travelers. Our analysis here really reveals that his conviction is likely just a fraction of the tragedy he actually caused.
Which brings us to a final provocative reflection for you to consider. Given Ivan Milat's absolute geographical mobility from his job, his decades-long history of targeting hitchhikers, and the sheer volume of unsolved disappearances that match his brutal and unique pattern over 2 decades, what is the true comprehensive cost of the life and crimes of Ivan Milat?
How many additional families across Australia are still waiting for an answer that he took with him to the grave? That remains a heavy, unanswered question for Australian authorities and for all the victims' families.